The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar. We're going to give everyone just 1 more minute to arrive before kickstarting today's presentation. So bear with us and we'll resume shortly. Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Sitecore versus third-party testing tools, a comparison presentation. Just to give you a few ground rules on today's webinar, we're going to be take about approximately 30 minutes for today's session. You are welcome to input questions, so if you have any questions you would like answered at the end of today's presentation, please input those using the toolbar on the right-hand side of your screen, and we'll endeavour to answer those at the end of today's presentation. So just give you a quick background on who we are. I don't want to spend too much time on this. So we are Ratio Partners, so we're a UK digital agency. We focus on optimization. We work quite heavily across a range of platforms, Sitecore being one of them, but also Optimize, VWO, Test and Target, and we'll be talking around a lot of these tools today. So we, as an agency, work with UK businesses to identify what does good and successful look like in terms of delivering a better experience for their customers and put in place the testing personalization frameworks that will enable you to drive conversions and improve customer experience. So at this point, I'm going to hand over to today's speaker, to Douglas Morris, who's the head of optimization at Ratio Partners here in the UK, to lead you through the rest of the presentation. So, hello, Doug.
Thanks, Mario. Okay, so the purpose of the webinar today is, essentially we understand that the marketing technology landscape, not just related to optimization, but certainly with respect to optimization, it's massive and it's fragmented. There's a really large variety of tools for any given use case or any given task. And there's a lot of crossover between those tools as far as what their capabilities are. We are a Sitecore partner, and we're founded predominantly by ex-Sitecore employees. So we have a really strong understanding of Sitecore as a technology, but we're also aware that there are a lot of other tools out there that can do optimization and personalization. And what we want to look at today is how the features of those other products compare to Sitecore, why you might choose to pick a more specialized tool in terms of where the strengths are. And the specific focus of today's webinar is to look at what can be achieved out of the box. So we understand, or I understand as a marketer, that often a big challenge with any sort of program that you're trying to get off the ground is development resources. They are a scarce commodity in every organization. So although Sitecore and indeed these other testing platforms can do a lot with the appropriate level of customization, we're primarily going to be focused on what they can do out of the box that you could start using more or less straight away. So there's 4 areas that we want to talk to today. Firstly, in terms of optimization, we'd split that into 2 areas, being personalization capabilities of these different platforms and A/B testing capabilities. We'll look at the method with which you execute any tests or experiments in these platforms. And then we'll also talk about something that's very, very important, which is measurement. How do you actually determine which of the activities you're running have been successful? What are the strengths and weaknesses of each platform with respect to that? So we'll start off with personalization capabilities. Now what I'll do is take a look at some of the more granular details about the strengths and weaknesses of each platform, and then show you how these apply to user journeys and I guess like real business context. Sitecore is an extremely strong platform when it comes to personalization capabilities. So there are a number of things that you can do at a simple level, like show the user a particular banner if they saw a page or completed a form, personalize on a more complex journey, like the visitor did watched a video on their first visit and then downloaded a case study on their second visit, and we want to target them with a particular experience because we think that we can improve the user experience by doing so. We can personalize on engagement value score, something you're probably familiar with, but we'll touch on shortly. And we can also personalize on visitor profiles. So or profiling visitors, I guess I should say, based on the content that they view, and trying to have an understanding of which one of your products or services are most relevant to them, and then surfacing some content based on that. So the other two platforms that we're going to focus on for the purpose of this comparison are VWO and Optimizely. There are quite a few of them out there outside of these two, but they're broadly similar in terms of the level of capability. So VWO, which is more of an entry-level testing and personalization tool, the only capability it has around personalization is to personalize on some user attribute, like the type of device that they're visiting the website on, their geographic location, what landing page they came in on, or their marketing channel. So those are relevant pieces of context when it comes to how and why someone's coming to your website, but it's certainly very far from building a complete picture of what the person is doing and how you should respond to that. Optimizely is an enterprise targeted product, and it has a lot of capabilities that VWO does not as a result. In Optimizely, you can personalize on more complex journeys. So you can personalize based on user attributes that they've seen any combination of pages, triggered any number of events by clicking things or playing videos, like in the case of Sitecore. And you can also set up rules around user journeys that might happen over a number of visits, such as that they did X and then within 7 days they did Y, like the Sitecore scenario of playing a video and then downloading a case study. So what does this look like, and where do these strengths and weaknesses really shine? So firstly, I want to talk about visitor profiling, because this is one of the best features of Sitecore when it comes to personalization, in my view. If we imagine a customer journey on Amazon, where a user comes to the website, they firstly view a product page for a bottle of whiskey, and then they move elsewhere on the website and view 3 different product pages relating to clothing. As I mentioned, VWO can't actually look at this journey and then respond to it with a new experience out of the box. Optimizely, if you had to find, for example, that where someone has viewed alcohol, then show them an alcohol banner on the homepage, or where someone had viewed winter clothing, then show them a winter clothing banner on the homepage. Which of those experiments that the user would fall into when they come back to the homepage is determined by you in advance in the priority order that you set the experiments in. So you might say in the Optimizely interface that the alcohol experience is the most important one in the hierarchy of possible personalization. Or you might say that the winter clothing one experiment is the most important. But either way, you have to set it in advance, and it's not really responding to the level of customer interest in either of those different product types. Conversely, in Sitecore, when you profile your content and then your visitors, and then target experiments to those profiles, Sitecore is going to be showing the experiment or experience to the visitor that is that they've had the greatest affinity for. So if the person viewed the whiskey page once and then viewed 3 lots of winter clothing, Sitecore is going to be intelligent enough to know that the user's probably more interested in winter clothing, and so that's the personalized experience that should be delivered to the user. So it's a really powerful way to respond to the actual customer context, not just using a predefined rule that if they saw a whiskey page, then they must be very interested in whiskey. The other very powerful feature of Sitecore is engagement value. So I mentioned that in Optimizely you can set up audiences based on predefined rules around particular events that the user has triggered, pages that they've seen, and so on. What this means in the context of building an audience and saying what experience that audience should be delivered is that in Optimizely you need to be very specific around which particular interaction should have happened in order for the user to see the new experience. So you could set up a rule that says if the user has 2 product video plays, 3 article downloads, and saw an inquire now call to action, then we should show them a particular experiment, such as, show the inquire now call to action, because we think that those actions mean that the user is appropriately engaged. But user journeys might not happen quite in the way we anticipate. The user might not actually have had any of the product video plays and instead had 10 article downloads. And subsequently, they wouldn't actually fall into that predefined audience. In the case of Sitecore, though, as you'd be familiar, we can apply an engagement value to different sorts of interactions that might be happening on the website, similar to a lead score. So essentially, it lets us apply a value to some micro interactions and then leverage that in our personalization. So in the case of Sitecore, we would say if the user's accrued 90 or 100 plus points or whatever the scale is that you choose, show a prominent inquire now CTA. And that's quite powerful because it means that we're not predefining exactly what the journey must have been, simply that we're predefining what value we would attribute to each of the interactions they might make. And then any combination of points that they get from those interactions that hits our threshold will let them see the new experience. So these 2 features with respect to Sitecore are a very nuanced way of delivering a personalized experience is how I would put it. And certainly out of the box, they're more powerful than the capabilities of third-party testing tools. Next, we want to talk about A/B testing. So one of the things to be mindful of when it comes to your optimization program and A/B testing you might be looking at doing is this concept of testing velocity. And testing velocity basically means over a given period of time, 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, how many effective tests were you actually able to run? You can imagine that the more tests you're able to get off the ground, the more likelihood of a winning test, the more learnings you'll be able to have from those completed tests. And so testing velocity is a great metric to understand how well your testing program is doing. Now, this is where these third-party testing tools really shine, because in the case of Sitecore, when it comes to what and how you can test, you're restricted a lot to using things that you've pre-developed essentially. So you have particular components, layouts, styling, etc., that you can choose from, and those are all that you have to use without additional development overhead. In the case of VWO and Optimizely, though, you can pretty well do what you want to a page out of the box with a very simple interface and no coding changes. If you have access to a front-end developer resource or someone who's familiar with JavaScript, HTML, CSS, etc., you can even do more sophisticated changes inside of the testing interface itself without the need to go through release cycles and things of that nature. So it's quite powerful with respect to letting you have more flexibility to experiment and do it more easily. When it comes to targeting and segmentation, you can't actually apply targeting to A/B tests out of the box within Sitecore, e.g. Show this experience to mobile devices only, etc. And when it comes to actually looking at the test results and segmentation of those, you're also quite limited in your ability to easily segment the results to see not just what happened at a top line level, but really which audiences responded best to the new experience. And then in terms of the method of actually executing on these tests, whether it's personalization or A/B testing, it's kind of what I've already touched on, but this is, again, where these other platforms really shine. So VWO, Optimizely, Google Optimize, etc., they all have a point-and-click interface. So you're looking at a version of the page that you want to be making changes to, and you just right-click on an area, click Edit Text, for example, and then you can put in a new text, save it, and you're done. You can, as I said, make direct code changes within the editor if you need to. And if you want a test to happen across multiple pages, for example, if you have 5 different product pages and you want to change the call to action button color on every one of them, then in VWO and Optimizely, you can do that very easily just by entering the URLs as URLs to be targeted. In Sitecore, on the other hand, you'd be needing to make the changes to each of the pages one by one, or implement tests against the templates that the page are actually being created off. And that kind of increases the level of complexity and the chances that something might go awry or that you won't be able to get the test out the door as quickly as you hoped. So in terms of speed to execute, and indeed who can actually start making these changes and getting some value from these changes, VWO and Optimizely are definitely very, very strong in that respect. So I want to show you an example of what I mean by this kind of point-and-click interface. This is a screenshot from a product detail page for John Lewis for some towels. And you can see I've highlighted, or in fact it's highlighted by the testing tool, but I've loaded up this product detail page in the testing tool just in my browser, and I've left-clicked to select an element, and immediately I can start making some changes to the styling. I can click Edit Element and change some of the text and things of that nature if I wanted to. But if I just hold down what I clicked and drag it up above the elements that were below it at the time, being above it at the time, being related to delivery and social sharing, you'll see that the element, the upsell element, is actually moved on the page already. And all I need to do then is basically save it, and will it be a QA process, obviously, but it's a very, very simple way to make even quite complex changes, essentially. As I mentioned, you can also change text, styling, images, and things like that nature very simply. So to do that, you just need to click on an element within the page, click Edit Element. It would highlight that particular area, and you can change the text as you desire. I've put in some additional copy that the delivery is just £3.50, and click Finished, and then you're done. This is using Google Optimize, which is actually a free tool. As Mario mentioned at the start, we partner with VWO and Optimizely, which are even more easy to use and also sophisticated in terms of their capabilities. But you can see even with like what would be considered an entry-level specialized testing tool, you can actually do quite a lot, and it's quite a bit easier than Sitecore to execute on those things. Finally, I wanted to talk about experimentation measurement. This is really, really important. Obviously, we're doing these things, these A/B tests or these personalization experiments, because we want to create more business value in some form. So we need to be able to measure that easily to understand the impact of what we've done. In Sitecore, when you're running an A/B test, it's only against a primary goal. So there's no concept of primary and secondary metrics. To give you an example, that means that if I was doing a test on a product detail page, and it was to change the add to cart button color, I could set my metric perhaps as a goal that the user had clicked the add to cart button, or I could set the goal as that the user had reached the thank you page at the end of the checkout, but not both. In the case of VWO and Optimizely, you can have multiple metrics that are being measured for each test. Some goals, in the case of Sitecore, need to be triggered programmatically. So if there's a particular interaction within the page that you're wanting to increase, and you're wanting to increase the number of users that are doing that interaction, it may be the case that you need to get a developer to trigger a goal off the back of the interaction. In VWO and Optimizely, it's very much just a point and click interface to actually select a goal in the form of some sort of interaction, or if it's a thank you page, for example, that is the goal for the experiment, then you can just enter in the URL of the thank you page, and it will start to pick up the number of users that are getting there. One thing that is really great about these platforms is the investment that they've made in terms of the statistics and data science side of things. So Sitecore will run the test for you, and it'll tell you when it's reached a level of statistical confidence. That means you know that your variation is a winner or otherwise. But VWO and Optimizely are actually investing resources in improving the statistical models that sit behind that, so that essentially it can give you a test winner faster. So where in Sitecore, for argument's sake, you might need 1,000 visitors to go to the control page and 1,000 visitors to go to the variation in order to work out which one's actually won. It might only be 750 visitors in the case of to each in the case of VWO and Optimizely. And in the context of what I was talking about earlier, where what's really crucial is testing velocity in order to make your optimization program as effective as possible. Getting an outcome quicker means that you can move on to do other tests straight away, and you don't need to, or you can iterate on the test, and essentially you get more done with less time. One final thing is relating to not necessarily measurement, but more analysis. So in, again, the scenario of the test on the product detail page, I might not just want to understand whether users have clicked the add to cart button, but let's say my test variation with a button color change didn't work. What I might want to understand is, what did the users do if they didn't click my button? For example, did they go elsewhere on the page and open a tab of information that I might not have expected? Or in other words, what behaviors were influenced, whether the test won or not, that can help us learn and, again, iterate in the future. Out of the box, VWO and Optimizely integrate with Google Analytics. That means that you can really do some complex interrogation to understand what happened with your experiment. In the case of Sitecore, while the Sitecore Analytics definitely has strengths, for example, in this engagement value that I spoke about, it's not going to be strong at helping you understand what those more nuanced interactions look like. And as a result, you're probably going to want to look at some form of integration with a third-party analytics tool, even if you're using Sitecore for your testing and personalization, so that you have the capability to get those insights. So you can see that there are indeed a lot of strengths and weaknesses for each platform. So how do you decide which tool to actually go ahead with? Well, the first thing is that you should be really, this is specific to your organization, your business, and what your context is as a business and for the project. So we'd recommend that you kind of evaluate what the needs are relating to that, and then map those to the capability of each tool. It might be, for example, the case that you are a B2B business, you have a very long sales cycle. I think this personalization side of things will be very important to help promote the right content, right call to actions at the right time. In that case, it might be that Sitecore is the platform of choice to actually start to execute on some of these things. But if it's the case that you are an e-commerce retailer, for example, and you see that there are a lot of opportunities for you to optimize the copy, call to actions, headlines, etc., on a product page or a category page, perhaps one of the third-party testing tools is going to let you do that more effectively. So what this really comes down to is that you have to be pragmatic and technology agnostic. None of these tools can do everything for you yet. None of them can be the silver bullet. Looking forward to the day when that's the case, but it's not today. And finally, you really need to be prepared to invest in people and strategy that sit around these tools. So, I mean, marketing technology products have had fantastic capabilities for years and years now, but the capabilities are outpacing the use. The capabilities of the products themselves are outpacing the ability of the organizations who are investing in them to actually get a return. And more often than not, in our experience, that's because there's not enough investment in the people that use the tool, and the strategy around how and why you would use the tool. It's not about the tool itself so much as it is your thinking around how to use it. So that's everything I have. Mario, do we have any questions that have come through at all?
Yes, we do. You still have time to put your questions down, so feel free to write those down on the toolbar on the right-hand side. So having a quick look. So we've had a question come in. Which of the products you've been discussing would roughly equate to what is offered by Qubit?
I don't have experience with Qubit, actually. I can't talk to that.
Okay. Let's have a look here. Do you recommend any particular platform?
So it's, as I said, I guess at the start of this slide, it really is dependent on your organizational context and what you're actually looking to achieve. It's also, although we, in our view, this isn't so much about cost, it's about the amount of value that you're driving from these tools. There is quite a lot of variation in the cost of these tools as well. VWO is probably under £1,000 a month, whereas you might be looking at 50, 100,000 pounds or more a year for Optimizely. So your budget probably comes into it as well.
Okay, cool. All right, I think we've got time for one more question. Do you think personalization or testing have a bigger impact?
Look, they can both have a fantastic impact in terms of driving business value. What we typically experience is that you can, there are a lot of low-hanging fruit for most organizations that you can address using optimization techniques alone. Like I said, like headlines, call to actions, and so forth. But they definitely both have a place within every organization's testing approach.
Okay, cool. Thank you very much, Doug. That brings us to the half hour, and we said we'd wrap this up within 30 minutes. So just wanted to say thank you, Doug, for today's presentation, and thank you everyone on today's call for joining us. Today's session was recorded, and we will be sending out a copy of the recording, today's presentation, within a couple of days. So I'm just going to say thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your today.
Thanks, everyone.